after we see our first case in North
The
Carolina,
moment
Turner and
where
I are
I
just looking at each
Yeah, I
other
mean,
realized
and
it
that
was
coming back
definitely a
to
hard
campus
semester
wasn't going to
in
be
terms of
on March
feeling
then
17th
finally
of
we get that word
2020,
you know,
I
missing
think it took
people and
my
missing was sort
physical
of
body
part of
and also
my job. So
It happened.
Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
I need to obtain your verbal consent to conduct this recorded interview. Your participation in this research on collegiate experiences of COVID-19 at Davidson College is voluntary. The purpose of this oral history project is to document both individual and collective remembering of collegiate experiences of COVID-19 and the ways lives and relationships were impacted on campus last semester. If you agree to a recorded interview, I will ask approximately 8 to 10 questions for no more than an hour. Please understand that you can terminate the interview at any moment. Do you consent to this interview?
So specifically thinking about last semester. Okay. Last semester feels like forever ago.
one of the biggest things that was different, obviously, was the moment where I realized that coming back to campus wasn't going to be on March 17th of 2020. I think it took my physical body and also my mental mind a considerable amount of time to understand what it was like to abruptly leave on March 16th and then to come back, even though it was in a completely different month. I found myself wandering to some of my senior friends' apartments, like reaching for my phone to ask to go to a meal, and then like recognizing that that wasn't a thing anymore, that there were new people on campus, and that like where we ended on March 16th was the day that I left, was not a time we could go back to.
I think it'd be easier to say what wasn't affected by COVID and list those off, but I can't even think of those. The first thing that was difficult was the logistics of getting back home. Um, the CDI luckily paid for students like storage and stuff, because I always have a problem of like getting my stuff around. I had to call a friend down to pick me up and grab some of my stuff because I didn't know how long this was going to last or when I'd be back down here again. So he drove down by himself and we drove back up. Um, yeah, and then another difficult thing was continuing my classes. That was probably the worst semester academically for me. It was just difficult, especially with, I could imagine doing it now because I see kind of what like the workflow's like and how that life is. And um, but at the time, I was like, I don't know how to do discrete mathematics in person. I don't think I can do it virtual.
I was also navigating parenting in the midst of this and schools being out and unstable sorting. And so all of that was a lot of like, ooh, who am I? What am I doing? What is my primary role? All these ways in which I sort of understood myself. What I found in that and sort of in the setup that I had was that I abandoned a lot of my usual practices. Not just like self-care practices, but just like moving, being in my body in a way. And I got to the end of the year feeling pretty crappy. And really disconnected, like in some ways really disconnected. Like in some ways we were in this really confined spaces and like with ourselves, and I felt the least connected to myself that I had felt in a long time.
There were a lot of different experiences. Many of my friends that weekend did not go and party at F. They packed up their stuff because they were terrified of getting COVID or terrified of bringing COVID back to their family or had to scramble and get the cheapest flight home. And I think to a close group setting, the refugees was a week away from tech. And that was the world premiere of the play by Steve Kaliski. And so you have all of this grief from seniors who had their last 2.5 months taken away from them. You have the grief of an entire, 20-person cast who was 2 weeks away from opening a show that no one has ever seen before and felt so topical and important and beautiful.
Refugees getting canceled is also a tough one. I think that was worse than Frolics because that one I was more involved in, and I thought that was I don't know, it was a very interesting production. I thought it was well written. I thought it had a good message behind it, and it was being, I don't know, the production cast behind it, or the production crew behind it was just amazing. And it was going to be my first production at that point, like that was going to be a main stage production, so that was going to be cool. And a great cast, a lot of people that were in it. Some I knew and were already cool, some that I met, and some that I would now meet. I was really excited. When I found out when I did costume fittings too, I was like, oh, I'm gonna look spicy on stage. I didn't get that chance, but yeah, it's all good. It was I thought it was gonna be a fun debut of whatever Steve was excited about too, because I know he was excited to debut this. And
Professor Borey came in to rehearsal, and we were working on the testimonial sequence, and she was watching kind of our rough choreography and then was cleaning some stuff up and giving us some ideas. And Kayla Edwards was there that night taking photographs for her own academic project. Before that rehearsal started, I got a text message from somebody kind of higher up that was not totally clear, but like to me it seemed pretty obvious that the show was going to be canceled, but that I should continue to rehearse. And I just remember like very vividly that whole night, like feeling this sort of like ache of like, I was feeling very proud, especially like when Professor Borey was like making some of the messy stuff we'd done look really cool. And I was like, no one's going to see this. So that was really tough. And then, yeah, I think the next day, Chip and Kaylin and Carly were scheduled to start load-in at the Duke, and I think they were like ready to pull the truck out when I guess there was like the campus announcement of everyone's going home. Yeah, and like I remember like Fuji Lazada seeing me, like the faculty were all scattered around. We were going to these workshops to learn how to use Zoom, and Fuji was like pulling me aside and being like it was like, this was not a death, but it felt like somebody was giving me condolences for something. Like, I'm so sorry, It's just...
Memory is more a matter of reorganizing or reconstructing bits of information into a general scheme than it is a matter of accurate recall of the isolated bits themselves.
Stuck in the past, the present, and the future at once, which is why I say it's an out-of-body experience.
That on the one hand feels like offering dance as this beautiful outlet, right? As a place to be with oneself, as a place to process, as a place to like, yes, abandon all those old structures. Those aren't like what else could we create, feels really generative and exciting. On the other hand, there was also a sense of like, what the hell are we doing? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Like, why are we trying to keep any semblance of order? Dance, as I practice it, dance as I know it, is really connected to the breath. When you're in a moment where the breath is also on some level what's on trial, right? Like what we're trying to distance each other from the breath, what we're trying to, felt really crazy. It was like, at the one hand, I need to catch my breath. I need to tell everybody like, hey, nervous systems are shot, and everybody is like, you know, we need to like come down. You need to check in with yourself. And at the same time, when it's like, you know, the breath is also a source of anxiety.
Yeah, it was a bit difficult to do physically exerting activities. I mean, I ride my skateboard with a mask, and that's also not fun. It feels like I'm getting like there's just water and sweat all in my mask, and I'm just breathing through it. And then I get to rehearsal, and that's where I start at, and I'm like, oh god.
The awareness that I was so paranoid about getting sick, and so every like small thing in my body that was different on a day, I would be like, what is
And like I was very stressed out myself. You know, I would be outside with another theater, like a theater student who'd like walk up like a foot away from me, and I was like, you gotta stand back, like 6 feet, man. Come on. And they'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. You know, like, so like this was partly, you know, a personal thing, right? Of like, I wanna, you know, make sure that we're doing all the campus things, but I also like, I don't know anything about this virus that you don't know, and I want to make sure we're being safe. So over the summer, I did I guess you could call it like a beta test of an outdoor performance. And my feeling was we have this huge, like, what do we have that other theater companies don't have? Like, we have an enormous campus that, at least over the summer, was like virtually empty. So I was like, you know, this was early in the pandemic, so everyone is still like very, very fixated on social distance, and not that that has gone away, but like the key was, how do we keep people far apart? And you know, I started thinking about, with a few other people, like a drive-through theater model of like, let's take the huge campus and let's kind of shuttle people from stop to stop, and they arrive at a place, and you know, maybe they're in their cars or they get out of their cars, and from a distance they watch a scene and they get back in their cars and they go somewhere else. So we did this sort of series of vignettes that weren't necessarily all related, but it was called Exit 30.
And I think that kind of opportunity over the summer, when things were really heating up and I was already navigating being inside with campers, helped to build my comfort level with something that I love so dearly. And so I think by the time I came back to campus, it was easier for me to feel committed to doing something that still made me nervous. I was grateful in the fall semester to kind of have the same feelings as everyone else. So the show that I did in the fall was the Ubi Orta Pestilentia, which was a similarly styled drive-through pandemic theater that was masked and distanced. I think that had we tried to go into a theater building, I wouldn't have wanted to do it.
Has really magnified sort of what's always been true. And my response has changed over time. I mean, my first sort of feeling through the summer is like, dance is not the answer here. You know, like I really had a profound sense. And so a sort of sense of like, dance is not the answer. There are much more immediate things that we just need to be working on in terms of care, right? In terms of like the social body, taking care of the, and then a kind of I'll be blatant and say a kind of resentment around, so seeing my friends and my colleagues and whatever, right, having lost work, having everybody being in this sort of panic, New York being on lockdown, all of these ways, right, the arts community really losing all of its market potential and capital, and yet being looked at to like bring us together and tell us how to get out of here and tell us how to write, that I was like, that's not fair. Like, it's not on artists. They're trying to survive right now. As you noted, like, bodies are precious, right? We know that. And so dancers' bodies are, people are trying to figure out how to make a living, how to keep themselves healthy, how to do all of these things. And that, you know, we want to turn to the arts to like inspire us in this moment. I had a really last fall, especially kind of reaction, like, nah.
I mean, it's like a sports team. You go through the practices and you go through the rehearsals, and then you have your game or you have your performance and you are in front of an audience, but it's about doing that performance or that game with the other people. I think there is also a heavy discrepancy in institutional care and commitment to different things on campus, because it is hard to see groups of athletes playing games and traveling without masks on, and chorale can't sing at commencement. Because while it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful that the seniors get to sing at commencement, it is, and they've said it, it has never been about performing at commencement. It is about singing one last time with the chorale. And we can't do that, even though it's outside, even though we're wearing masks.
I know it's physically demanding work. And so that for me was actually the place where, because it came up at some meetings, some arts chairs meetings about like, should we be pushing for the choir to be, or should we be, or the kind of testing that's happening around. And I said, if we're following protocols that we feel like require testing even more often, right? Or if we are, then I'm not sure that we should be doing that right now. And again, that feels really hard when I know that students are like, I only have 4 years, right? Or like, this is my, but for me, it keeps going back to this place of like, how much are we willing to acknowledge that this is different, or like we're in a crisis, or how much are we gonna, what do we want to pretend that we get to keep going forward, or trying to recreate things that aren't what are right now.
Are people really going to go back to the theater? Like, I don't know. I hope so. But has the trauma been so deep that they're like, you know what? I don't really need this. I'm good staying at home and watching Disney Plus. Like Davidson doesn't have to worry about this because theater is not the moneymaker of Davidson College. But you know, if you're working in professional theater, if you're especially like part of a small nonprofit,
the sort of prioritizing of what gets prioritized, right? Like a bar is open, but not an elementary school, versus, right? And again, and similarly, like that athletics are happening, sort of resiliency, but also frailty of bodies, right? Like we have to all manage our own risk. We have to all, but this is something that isn't just about our own comfort with risk, right? It's like we're also putting other people in jeopardy, and knowing, I mean, things like long COVID, or, you know, what can happen to seemingly to the respiratory system, like that has long-term impacts. And I think as a dancer who knows, you push through for a while, that's fine. And then suddenly you're 15 years out and you still have the same injury. Our bodies are really, they're kind of necessary through to the end.
there's no process in the new version because it's not something any of us have ever done before. So I think like processes, it's helpful. It can also be problematic, right? Like the way it's easy to be like the way we've always done it in the theater is this. And that can be comforting, but it can also be like a lot of practices go unquestioned, you know. For instance, like the really, really, really long tech rehearsals, like the 10 out of 12s. In the context of David, I mean, this is problematic in terms of, you know, equitability and accessibility to, like, you know, what if you have another job that you have to have and you can't be there for 10 hours? In terms of Davidson, like, you've got to put everything down for Saturday and Sunday for your tech, you know, even though you're already working your butt off and you don't have time for anything. Like, it's an unrealistic expectation. So kind of going on a tangent a little bit, but just to say that in the before times, we had this very systematic way of doing it. And I kind of knew exactly where we were in the process. And it's like, oh, we're 2 weeks out and we're not quite there with this, this, and this. And that's okay, because normally at 2 weeks, this is where you are. Or normally at 2 weeks, we're a little further than this. So I feel nervous, or I feel great because we're further along. Like, I just have so much more of a frame of reference for how I should sit in my process, where you as actors should sit in your process. So even though it can be a little problematic, I think it's important to have some frame of reference. Now with like Exit 30 and the zombie play, when we were talking like behind the scenes about like how much rehearsal time should we have, basically I was just like, I don't know. How much do you need? I don't know. I have no idea. I was trying to kind of advocate for a, like, let's do it in way less time. Like for the zombie play, like, I don't know what kind of headspace students are going to be in this semester. I don't know. I think this will be fun for them, but I also don't know. Like, I think I was wrong in one assumption where I was like, they're not going to have anything to do. So this will be fun because it'll be something to do. And then Davidson started, and Davidson's going to Davidson no matter what you do. So like, even though it was a weird semester, people were still overextended and stressed out and doing way too much. So I was like, you know what? It's like not a big deal if an actor is not there for a rehearsal like 1 week before the show. Like we'll figure it out. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal if the person playing the French horn is not there the second of the 5 performances. So what? Like, you just, I guess it kind of teaches a little bit more patience and a little bit more, you know, like, is this really important, or is this only important because the way we did it beforehand made us think it was important? So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think something that's been good before the pandemic is theater has been, well, theater and film and TV have been much more aware of consent and making sure that actors are not just saying yes to get along, but are saying yes because they actually, whether it's intimacy or scheduling or whatever, like, actors need to be able to voice explicitly their consent to do stuff. So I think this spirit of consent carried in.
A large movement for theatrical intimacy training. And when you're in a pandemic, you have obviously consent, which remains constant all the time, but then there's also COVID consent. You know, can I touch you at all? Can I come within 6 feet of you? And so I think the future of theatrical intimacy can even extend to physical distance from someone, not just physical touching. And so I think that's something really interesting, especially because I think a lot of people, at least myself, I think it's going to be really hard to integrate away from COVID anxiety after the pandemic is over, and feeling comfortable to go up to someone and just give them a hug if I have just met them. You know, they're not in my COVID bubble.
Please don't rehearse indoors unless your entire cast consents to rehearse indoors, and like that they are genuinely consenting to that and not just saying that because they feel like they have to. And And I think some of you so, my piece was all outside. I rehearsed mine entirely outside. I think some of you went indoors, and I trusted that you all were, on the same page and good with that. But because the way we interact with each other and the way we just are in the same space together, it was so fraught and so stressful. I felt like it was important that we get rid of all the old ways. Don't worry about this 5-minute break every, don't get so caught up in how your directing teachers taught you how to direct, and think more about what do my actors need to be safe right now to feel like they're safe.
Our first rehearsal was in the Baker parking lot. So everything was outside, and everything was devised outside. So there was no familiar Room 100 or Barber Theater or Duke Family Performance Hall that's like a normal quote unquote theater space to practice in. It was all in the great outdoors.
I mean, honestly, for me, I think it is the familiar. It's like am I on the floor? Am I rolling around in there? But I think in that sort of sense of this is a place, but it's oh, this is a space of exploration, right? This is a space of comfortable discomfort, right? In that it's not that I feel good all the time in the studio, right? It's not oh, I go and I dance and I feel great. Sometimes things hurt, or sometimes you're stuck, or sometimes things, but it feels like a safe space to be vulnerable in a process. So that for me is that kind of familiarity is when there's a space where that feels oh, I've been in that state, that vulnerable state here, and survived.
And there is, we've talked about the shared space and the familiarity of that and the creativity that can happen in a confined space, but I think there is still merit to having theater and arts and music in the wackiest of places. Walking around chambers and having your own personal instrumental background from the jazz band or the orchestra, phenomenal. And more importantly, I learned there's more music ensembles than I was even aware of. There are more students who are in those ensembles that I know that I had no clue were in them. And I think especially in the background of arts in America is seen, at least in terms of Broadway and symphony orchestras, there is an understanding that it is an elite, white, upper class thing that you go to, like the opera, and you go to these Broadway shows because the tickets are $500 and you can afford it every week. And I think while obviously our theater and our ensembles here are not like that, there is still the understanding that arts are inaccessible to everyone. And so I think there is something powerful in, even if it's just a live stream of something happening in person, physical accessibility and also social accessibility to the arts by putting them in unfamiliar places and taking them out of the buildings in which people may say oh, I'm not I don't have a place in that room. I don't have a place in that space. I think bringing it out of those spaces that can have those attachments can be really powerful and important moving forward with sharing the arts.
You bring out an amazing concept of the privileges that are attached to buildings and
locations, and especially in a PWI institution, of what those buildings can mean to certain people. And I want to ask you that throughout this pandemic, that how have your relationship to the locations that you are often in have changed?
I think taking a step back and understanding the associations of spaces and what it means has been really important to me. But one of the joys in that separation and taking that step away from those spaces and looking at it as positive light is I think of driving up the hill for Ubi Orta Pestilentia, where there were zombies on the sidewalk, and I was hanging out of the car reacting to it all and seeing people who I've never seen in an art building looking at me like, what is happening? Or seeing, people who I know have never gone to something or have said like, I don't think that like this is for me, and seeing their interest peak and the sense that like they do have space to go and be a part of these things has been something that's joyful.
This research happened through oral history, a class in sociology, education, and Africana studies. In the study of performing artists in Davidson College during COVID-19, I interviewed 4 people in total. Davidson College's performing arts community is comparatively small to other departments. Thus, most of the people I have asked to interview were either colleagues or professors of mine. 2 out of 4 interviews were professors and the other 2 were students. It was important to include both professors and students of performing arts because of the collaborative nature of performing arts education. Professors are often directors, choreographers, and producers in rehearsal rooms and studios. Learning from my experience as a theater and dance student, where I have spent multiple hours every day with professors outside of class, their point of view was crucial to this study. Dedication or time spent in the performing arts in higher education was also a variable that was in consideration. These 4 stories only represent a portion, but also individual stories of the performing arts at Davidson. With the huge impact of COVID on performing arts, this research will continue.